October 5th, 1983. A doctor in Chicago tells a 26-year-old comic that he has a disease with no known cause, no known cure, and a name most people in the room have never heard before: sarcoidosis. Bernard Jeffrey McCullough writes the word down on a scrap of paper so he won't forget how to spell it. He will carry that word for 25 years, through 2 television deals, 3 Kings of Comedy tours, a sitcom that bears his name, and roles in some of the biggest films of the early 2000s. And for almost all of that time, the audience laughing at him will have no idea it exists. There's a particular kind of secret that isn't kept out of shame. It's kept because telling it changes how people treat you. And Bernie Mac had already spent a childhood learning what happens when illness becomes the only thing people see in a person. His mother, Mary McCullough, was diagnosed with cancer when he was still a young boy on Chicago's South Side, and the disease stayed with her for years, not weeks. He watched her cry from the pain more than once. One afternoon, he climbed into her lap while Bill Cosby performed on The Ed Sullivan Show, and somewhere in the middle of that routine, her crying turned into laughing. He was 4. He decided right there that he wanted to be the reason she laughed instead of cried, for as long as he could manage it. She died when he was 16, his sophomore year of high school. His older brother died of a heart attack in his 20s. His father, who was largely absent by then, died not long after. His grandmother died too. By the time Bernie Mac was out of his teens, most of the people who raised him were gone. So when he stood on stage years later, first in Chicago's Cotton Club, then in the subway stations where he told jokes for spare change because it was better than standing there in silence, then on HBO's Def Comedy Jam in 1992, where he calmed a hostile crowd Martin Lawrence couldn't handle by telling them flatly that he wasn't scared of them. He wasn't performing an invention. He was doing the one thing he'd already figured out worked: turning what hurt into something a room could laugh at together. It's why his comedy read as unusually honest even by stand-up standards. Most of what he said about his life had actually happened. What he didn't say was that in 1983, a year before most people outside Chicago's comedy scene had ever heard his name, doctors had already found something wrong in his lungs. Sarcoidosis is not cancer. It isn't contagious. Nobody, even now, knows exactly what causes it. The leading theory is that something inhaled, some trigger nobody's identified, sets off an immune reaction that shouldn't happen. And the body responds by building small clusters of inflammatory cells called granulomas, mostly in the lungs and skin, sometimes in the heart, the eyes, the nervous system. In a lot of patients, it goes away on its own within a couple of years. In others, it doesn't, and if the inflammation isn't controlled, it leaves permanent scarring in whatever organ it's chosen to attack. Mac's case attacked his lungs. He was 26. He had just started building a life as a professional comedian, a life that required standing under hot lights, projecting his voice to the back of large rooms, and eventually, once film work came along, running through action scenes and doing his own stunts. And now he had a disease that could, without warning, make breathing harder. He told almost no one outside his family. His wife, Rhonda, whom he'd married in 1977 when he was 19, knew. A small circle of doctors knew, doctors he stayed with for decades, following their direction, testing new treatments as they came available, watching for flare-ups the way another person might watch for weather. The public did not know. Not during his stand-up years. Not during the Kings of Comedy tour with Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, and D.L. Hewley, a tour that filled arenas and became a Spike Lee film in 2000. Not when Fox handed him his own sitcom in 2001, built around a fictionalized version of his life, where he played a comedian who suddenly finds himself raising his sister's 3 kids. Not through 5 seasons of that show, 2 Emmy nominations, a Peabody Award, a Humanitas Prize. Not through Ocean's 11, Bad Santa, Mr. 3000, Guess Who? Films, where audiences watched him move, argue, sprint, hold his own physically against actors half his age, with none of his medical history. He was, by several accounts, fanatical about his diet and about exercise, more disciplined about his body than most people around him realized. And it's worth sitting with why. A disease that could scar his lungs from the inside meant discipline wasn't vanity for him, it was maintenance. Every round of golf, every stunt he insisted on doing himself instead of handing to a double, every grueling shoot schedule he kept without visible strain was also, quietly, a test of a body he already knew had a weakness in it that could resurface at any time. Here's what makes the timing strange, and worth pausing on. Mack didn't tell the public about the sarcoidosis in the 1980s, when it might have made sense to explain a rough patch, or in the 1990s, when his career was accelerating and journalists were starting to write profiles. He held it for over 20 years. He finally acknowledged it publicly in 2005. And even then, the announcement doubled as good news. The disease, he said, had gone into remission. He wasn't introducing the public to an active crisis. He was closing the book on one, at least as far as anyone outside his medical team could tell. 2 years after that disclosure, in 2007, he and Rhonda used their own money to start the Bernie Mac Foundation, aimed specifically at sarcoidosis, research, and patient support. It's an unusual thing to build an entire foundation around a disease you've just told. People is in remission, but sarcoidosis doesn't work in clean lines. Remission means the active inflammation has quieted. It doesn't erase what scarring already happened, and it doesn't guarantee the disease stays quiet. In July 2008, Bernie Mac checked into a hospital in Chicago with a fever and trouble breathing. Reports at the time described pneumonia. He was moved to intensive care at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, placed on a ventilator. His publicist told the press his sarcoidosis and his pneumonia were unrelated conditions, two separate problems that happened to collide. Doctors who've studied the case since have offered a more layered explanation. His sarcoidosis, even quiet, had likely already done some damage to lung tissue over 25 years, and the medications used to keep the disease suppressed, corticosteroids, immunosuppressants, can leave a person's immune system less able to fight off a severe infection when one arrives. Whether that's precisely what happened in his case, nobody involved has ever stated with full certainty. What's on the record is this. His sister-in-law, Marianne Grosset, said that on the night before he died, he struggled to breathe, that doctors tried to resuscitate him twice, and that his wife and daughter were in the room when he was pronounced dead on August 9, 2008. He was 50 years old. Nearly 7,000 people came to his memorial at the House of Hope Church on Chicago's South Side. Chris Rock was there, Samuel L. Jackson, Ashton Kutcher, Chicago's mayor, his Kings of Comedy castmates, his 3 sitcom castmates. People who had shared stages and sets with him for years, some of whom, by several accounts, still hadn't fully understood how long he'd been managing a chronic illness underneath all of it. 2 of his films, Soul Men and Madagascar, Escape to Africa, were released a few months after his death and dedicated to him. A third, Old Dogs, came out the following year, also carrying his name in its dedication. Isaac Hayes, his co-star in Soul Men, died the day after Mac did, August 10, 2008. An overlap so strange that for a brief window, entertainment reporters weren't sure which death to lead with. What's left of the 25 years he spent not talking about it is now, somewhat deliberately, made public. The foundation he and Rhonda started funds a research and treatment facility in Chicago, now known as the Bernie Mac Sarcoidosis Translational Advanced Research Center, the STAR Center, which opened in 2012 and has since seen a steady rise in patients seeking diagnosis and treatment. A rheumatologist there has described patients half joking that they have Bernie Mac disease, asking, in the same breath, whether they're going to die the way he did. Most sarcoidosis patients don't. The disease has a mortality rate in the single digits, even among the populations most affected by it, and a large majority of cases resolve without ever threatening a patient's life. Bernie Mac lived with it for 25 years and worked through nearly all of them. That's the part that doesn't fit the shape most people assume from the outside, the idea of illness as an obstacle a person either beats or is beaten by. Mac's sarcoidosis was neither defeated nor did it define him publicly for most of his life. It sat underneath everything: the Subway performances, Def Comedy Jam, the Kings of Comedy Stage, 5 seasons of network television, a run of film roles that made him a recognizable face far beyond stand-up circles, and he never let it become the story until near the very end, when he decided on his own terms that it should.